those are the handouts for the 3 sessions so far. If you can hear me. Hi. Can you hear me? Excellent. And can you see my pointer? Hey. Good. Okay, now I've put the 3 handouts so far here in the chat box. So we're all up to date on handouts then. And next week I'll put next week's in and so on. A pleasure. There? Can you see that, Alex? I'll point at the Gamma Zalachia. That's what I'm fancying right now. Yay. I know. It's just one of the best dishes, isn't it? Just absolutely one of the best dishes in the world. Oh, well. Right. Well, shall we kick off? Is it just us? Okay. Well, let's kick off. So week 3 is the Ebro Valley. And this includes Rioja. And it's the heartland of some really great wines in Spain. And a lot of bulk production as well. Never forget that. There's very good everyday wines made in Rioja as well as top-notch wines and the regions around and about. So this is the places we're looking at. We're looking at Rioja, Navarra, and Aragon. 3 really important wine regions or autonomous regions that produce wine. Rioja has the most fame. I think Aragon is a great producer of some really interesting, great value wines. And I think Navarra is one of the most underrated regions in Spain. Okay. So, Aragon. The capital of Aragon is Zaragoza, and that is the Basilica de Nuestra Señora del Pilar. And it is an amazing, I really like Zaragoza. It's a fabulous city. I had my first ever tapas crawl in Zaragoza, and it's getting on for as far north as the Moors ever got. And you've got this wonderful architecture that has memories of the Moorish influence. Look at those tiles on that Basilica church. It's a really good city, really interesting to go round at night, particularly. There's the Aragon flag. It's got similar attributes, of course, to the neighbouring Catalan flag. They were a unified province for many centuries. And Here, you've got the most amazing, it's one of my favourite places in Spain, actually. And of course, being very old and feeble, I've entirely forgotten its name. It's here. This is a place, if you've never been, you really must go. It's the Monasterio de Piedra, and it's in a national park in a canyon, really in a canyon. You can't see it at all until you're up to it, and it's right in the south of Aragon, which is a dry old place, and you've got this subterranean river cutting through, and this series of incredible waterfalls, and the highest waterfalls in Western Europe. And the back in, I want to say Philip V's time, they built this whacking great big monastery. It looks like, the Escorial or something. It looks incredible. And I was taken there on a wine trip once, and this late medieval monastery has been converted into a hotel, and it's really nice. And I took my family there later, and we had a fabulous time. So if you're ever around there, I highly recommend it. And if you stay in the hotel, you get free entry to the park. I love it there. I'd like to go back there, actually. I'd like to go anywhere, to be honest. Also in Aragon, you've got what they call Mudéjar, which again is very ornate, sort of Moorish style architecture. And Teruel is famous for that, which is one of the cities in Aragon, and it's also famous for ham, of course. Teruel, aren't they great, those towers? Really, really unusual, really lovely to see. I've forgotten the name of this. This is near Daroca, but I've forgotten the actual name of the village. I apologise, but you get an idea of how, sort of dramatic the landscape is. And look at the wall. And that, by the way, was right on top of the Monasterio de Piedra. And the canyon is just sort of there. It just drops away. Remarkable place. I've mentioned it already, but Aragon is incredibly famous for jamón de Teruel. It's also famous for its sausage, the Longaniza de Aragon. And when I was a kid, I used to love these frutas de Aragon, which is crystallized fruit coated in dark chocolate. I loved those when I was a kid. I haven't had one since about 1976, but hey ho. So, enough about Aragon. Let's talk about some wine in Aragon. It's a big old place, Aragon. Look, that's it. Oh, need my pointer. That's it there. And so it's a big region. It's got Navarra to the west, a little border with La Rioja there. Then you've got a small border with Castilla y León, bigger border with Castilla-La Mancha. You've got a little exclave of the Comunidad Valenciana, Valencia there, a bigger border with the Comunidad Valenciana, and then a big border with Catalonia as well. And it really is, I think, very Spanish, Aragon. That Monasterio de Piedra, by the way, is sort of there, somewhere there, roughly, give or take. Might be a bit further over, but not much. No, I'm being stupid. It's not. It's there, roughly there. We were dropping down from San Sebastian through Navarra and third bank. It's got 4 DOs in it, Aragon, and it produces some really good wine. Basically, it's got 3 DOs which are reasonably similar, and specialise in Ganacha and make, on the whole, red wines. And then it has a real odd-bod DO up in the Pyrenees called Somontano. And Somontano, although it produces red wines from all sorts of grape varieties, it's most noticeable for its white wines, because it grows an enormous array of grape varieties on the south facing of the foothills of the Pyrenees, including Gewürztraminer and Riesling and all sorts of things. So the wines are very interesting. There's Pinot Noir there, but they also do Tempranillo and Ganacha. And I have to admit that I don't really taste the wines very often. My stepmother used to love Gewürztraminer, so I used to buy her some from there most birthdays. I knew the region as a child. I was in about 1971, 72. I was in Huesca with my family. We always drove through from the house in Spain back home again, and we sometimes came this way. And there's lots of ski resorts up here, so we would sometimes stay in Jaca, but more in Huesca, but more often stay in Jaca here. And in those days, Spain was very, very isolated, and there was Basque terrorism, so you had the Spanish army patrolling the mountains, and it was like going back in time, because they had mules carrying mountain guns, and so they used to flag us down and have a look around in the car. Amazing. And then you'd get to the border, and the queues to get into France were just extraordinary. I suppose we're going back to those times, sadly, but there we are. So it's a fascinating area up there, but I've never sort of moved my emotional attachment to the region to the wines of Somontano, because they seem a little bit international rather than Spanish to me, and I sort of, rightly or wrongly, shy away from that. But there's some very well made wines there, so if you like Gewürztraminer and things like that, give them a go next time you're in Spain. But I do love these wines down here, and these are very much great value. They really are great value. On the whole, we're talking pure Ganacha, which of course is Grenache. Grenache is a Spanish grape variety, as far as we can tell. It comes almost certainly from the Mediterranean coast of Spain, or the Mediterranean area of Spain anyway. So it may have moved inland from Catalonia, or it may have just been there in the first place. So we might never know. But Aragon unified with Catalonia. Oh well, there you are. Yes, but it's much more likely that the Catalans took it to Sardinia when they occupied the place than that they brought it back to Spain from Sardinia, would be my take on that. But that's just my view. And you've got three DOs that really specialise in Garnacha, and they're just, I think, brilliant. Personally, and I know other people disagree, my favourite of them is Calatayud. I think there's absolutely amazing wines made there. And when we could do this before Brexit, I used to ship over some brilliant wines that, as far as I'm aware, you cannot buy in the UK. And this was one of my favourites. It still is, if I could get it. And it was recommended to me by the sommelier at the Monasterio de Piedra. And it's just fantastic. It's about £10 or so. And it's full on, powerful, really, really delicious wine. So if you like things like Chateauneuf-du-Pape, this is a much better value alternative. Really joyful it is. Really joyful. Couldn't recommend it highly enough. Another one to recommend to you here. There we are. This is an extraordinary wine too. If it ever... There we are. And this does not have the DO, but it's very nearby on the slopes of a mountain called Moncayo, which is sort of there, always snow-capped, and it produces Garnacha with power but freshness as well. Both of those would just knock your socks off for the quality and the value, I think. That's what I really think. I was just looking up another one. Okay. There's some other wines to recommend. Oh yeah, they're very good too. Very good. So nearby, you've got the region called Campo de Borja. Normally, I don't find Campo de Borja as refined as Calatayud. Calatayud was, all of Aragon was a land of cooperatives until quite recently. But some of them have sort of reinvented themselves as private enterprises. And the one that makes Balthazar is a case in point. And are making much more. Now, they don't have to be private enterprises to do this, but they're making much more luscious wines, very smooth with bright fruit, really delicious. Whereas the old style was a bit more rustic, a bit more earthy and stewed. Not what we would want on the international market today. Although people like those wines, particularly in Spain. And I've always found Campo de Borja here to be more leaning in that style, but there are exceptions. As the name might suggest, Campo de Borja, it was one of the places where the Borgias lived. The Borgias were a Spanish, well, they are actually a Spanish family. There's a great quiz question for you. When did the last Borgia hold political office? Go on, have a go at answering that. No, but you'd imagine in the Renaissance or something, wouldn't you? It is a trick question. Yeah, I think it was in 2005, something like that. And a Borgia was president of Ecuador, so he was a descendant of the Renaissance Borgias. Anyway, they're a Valencian family originally. Their original home is right in the centre of Valencia, but they had estates up here, and that's why it's called Campo de Borja. They became more famously Italian later. And there are some good wines made in Campo de Borja. There's no two ways about it. And these guys, I think, make very good wines. Not at the lower end so much, but they're all right at the lower end, but a little bit higher at sort of 10, 12, 13 pounds. They make some really good. Stick to the Garnacha. They do have some other grapes, but that's what they do. This is their top one, and it's pretty good. It's not as good as the Balthazar, but it is good. Okay, very good, actually. And you've got the very confusingly named Carignana here. And of course, Carignana is a grape variety. It's Carignan, another Spanish grape variety that the French have stolen. And bizarrely, only 5% of the wines in Carignana are made from Carignana. They actually call it the Empire of Garnacha. That's their strapline. Carignana, the Empire of Garnacha. Very strange, but there we are. In all honesty, I haven't had many Carignanas for a very long time. So, but that's just how it goes. I don't control these things. I should do, but I don't. Okay. What else have I got? Okay. So, that's Aragon. Relatively small wine production compared to other regions. But of course, there will be Vinos de la Tierra between those regions as well. In fact, we will be talking about one later, okay, that does straddle the border between Navarra and Aragon. What have I got? Okay. Okay. Any questions on all of that before we move on? I'll just show you a lovely picture of plantings in Calatayud. There. Isn't that fabulous? So you can see these are very old Garnacha vines, 100 years old, something like that. And you can see they're very, very spread out to cope with drought stress. And you can see that the land is gently rising as well. So this is well, at the right time of year, yes. Yeah. And some grapes. And you can see the rich red clay and stony soils. And it gets very slaty further up. Yes, it is very dry. And that's why they have to space the vines out so much so that they're not competing for water. And so this is the bodega that makes the Balthazar wines. And as you can see, you've got terraces going up and up and up. No, it's clay, stone, and slate. Slate at the highest points. Pleasure. As you can see, there's the shoots. So the leaves will come very soon. Okay. Now, a few words about Navarra as well. I love Navarra. I've always had an affinity with Navarra. This is Olite Castle. Olite is one of the main towns, very old town in Navarra. And the castle is a parador. And I had my 4th birthday there and nearly lost one of my soft toys there. But we drove back and the staff had saved it for me. We had a turret room, and I was terrified because there was a suit of armour at the bottom of the spiral staircase. I was absolutely petrified of it. Now this is interesting. I have never been here, but this is sort of midway up Navarra, and it's Bardenas Reales Natural Park. And again, it looks quite deserty, doesn't it? It looks a bit Roadrunner-ish. Amazing place. Oops. Okay. This is Pamplona. This is the San Fermin, which is when they run the bulls. Not something I would go to. That's the town hall, which is lovely. I love Pamplona. It's got a wonderful, wonderful main square and little streets and bars. This is the Punta de la Reina, and it's right in the Navarra wine areas. And wow, I would not want to do that. It's bad enough in my little town where they run the bulls, usually in the harbour nowadays, and people have to. It's very much sort of macho on your sleeve, isn't it? My brother was, well, he didn't specifically go to the bull running in the next town round, but he was there, and the mayor made a little speech, and he said the town council were broke, so they couldn't release the bulls until they'd collected all the money in the bucket that the bull man needed. And so he said, in Valenciano, the local language, that everyone needed to put €1 in the bucket. And then he repeated it in Spanish, and he said €5. And then he repeated it in English, saying €10. So they have absolutely no idea that Valenciano is not some sort of impenetrable code. It's really just a mixture of French and Spanish, like Catalan. It's exactly the same as Catalan, actually, but they pretend it isn't. So I love that bridge, and that is the principal route of the Camino de Santiago, across that beautiful bridge, which is, of course, Roman in origin. Talking of Romans, on the extreme western edge of Navarra, you've got this amazing place. I've been, and it's a Roman villa called Las Musas, and it's got its own winery. That's a winery. Imagine that. Because, of course, villas weren't houses, they were communities, really. And then, of course, much closer to my heart, sadly, I wish I wasn't greedy, but I am. Pamplona has fabulous Basque Pinchos bars, as does Logroño in Rioja, and of course as does San Sebastian and Bilbao in the País Vasco. Esparagos Blancos has its own DO in Navarra, very important to them and very delicious. So, as far as I'm aware, it's only the Spanish who really prize white asparagus. It is a tricky match. I agree. I don't know what they match with it. I don't think they think about things like that. They just drink red wine or rosé wine with everything. I suppose it depends what you have with it. I just go for something very fresh. That's what I do. And they've also got a DO for their piquillo peppers, which are rather fabulous. Really delicious too. And there you see them being used in tapas or pinchos. Okay. Oh, and why not? Give it a go. Absolutely. What's the worst that could happen? So, here is Navarra. There is only one DO in Navarra, and that is Navarra. And I don't really understand why Navarra struggles, other than it's not as concentrated a wine region as Rioja. Rioja's famous for one reason, which I'll tell you about later. But it's strange that Navarra didn't manage to become famous at the same time. But Navarra historically is a bit different from Rioja. It's a land of small estates rather than big companies, traditionally. Some people have tried to change that, but it's still sort of a bit like that. And it produces also, you can't really sum up the wines that Navarra makes, as you'll see, because I'll struggle to sum them up. It makes almost every style you can imagine. It's probably most famous for rosados, rosés, made from garnacha. And all over Spain, if you order a rosado, you stand about a 90% chance of it being a garnacha rosado from Navarra, because they're very, very well distributed. But it makes all sorts of other things too. You will often find Tempranillo blended with Cabernet and Merlot, often. Sometimes with some garnacha in the blend as well. You will also find Cabernet Merlot or Merlot Cabernet blends. Quite a lot of those. They like that. They like to stress their French credentials. The Kingdom of Navarre, back in the Middle Ages, straddled the border, and Gascony was part of the Kingdom of Navarre as well. And so the French wine region of Irouléguy, which is here on those slopes there, uses Cabernet and Merlot. I'm not convinced by that argument, because of course Cabernet Sauvignon isn't a very old vine, so it's almost certainly not true. What is true, that a guy called Jose Magaña, who came from a winemaking family in Navarra, worked about 20 years in Bordeaux, and when he returned to Navarra in the 70s, he wanted to plant Cabernet and Merlot, and he smuggled cuttings in. Remember, Spain was virtually a fascist state still at that point, with a sealed border and all of that. So he smuggled these cuttings in and makes great wine. I mean, really, really good wine. I'm a huge fan of what he does. And everyone sort of followed suit. I'll get him up to yeah, there we are. And some of them are stupidly cheap as well, for what they are, but of course I can't find that. My computer's on a go slow. Yay, got it. Let's have a look. It's worth the wait, almost. There we are. You can buy this. This is a Cabernet Merlot blend. And made by Bodegas Viña Magaña, and it's about £10. It's fantastic, fantastic. Very underrated wines. Increasingly, producers have recognized how good their Garnacha is as well. And so you're getting a clutch of people producing pure Garnacha at high altitudes. So much fresher, more floral, almost Pinot Noir-like at times. And one of my favorite producers in the world is this one here. And it's in San Martin, San Martin de Unx, which is in the Baja Montaña, which is near Olite. It's sort of there somewhere. And it's quite high up. It's about 700 meters above sea level, something along those lines. And all the vines were planted in 1903. And it's run by this lovely young married couple who are delightful. And they're both obsessed by Garnacha. And they studied winemaking somewhere else. And then wanted their own estate. And this was, they found these little plots that had just been abandoned, really, and managed to piece them together and create their own project. And Domaine Loupier, I highly recommend them to you if you like Grenache, but very elegant Grenache. There's lots of other producers here. By the way, these subzones are completely unimportant. They never appear on labels. So, by all means, try and remember them, but it won't get you anywhere because they never mention them on the labels. In theory, they could. Domaine Loupier could put Baja Montaña on their labels, but even they don't. And they're a small producer from a specific site. So the bigger producers, certainly wouldn't. There's a few other producers that I'm very, very fond of. I think they deserve a bit of publicity. Señoría de Sarria make brilliant wines, very classic Spanish wines, I think, even when they're not using Spanish grape varieties. They're very, very classic wines. Their Reserva Especial is incredible, and it's a Cabernet Graciano blend, really wonderful. Bodegas Nequeas, they do some lovely wines, lots of lovely wines. But this is probably the one that you'll find. It used to be in Majestic. I don't know if it is now. Well, it's very old vine Garnacha, again from very high up. The bodega was a cooperative, and basically in the 1910s, the cooperative disbanded because they couldn't make a living out of wine. And then in the late 90s, they started producing again. So coaxed these old vineyards back into life. Hello, Cat. What did she want, Kate? Oh, I think she wants food. Sorry, the cat. Brilliant wines. Majestic used to sell it for a tenner, so I would highly recommend it. Oh, well, there you are. It's phenomenally good. It really is. And then this one is probably the classic for me, the absolute classic of Navarra wine. Bodegas Ochoa. Oh, excellent. I'm glad to hear you've got a sophisticated cat. I love Bodegas Ochoa. I've known them all my working life. They're based in Olite, so very dear to my heart. And they make beautiful wines. Their Ochoa Reserva is so good. It's just such a good wine. It's very elegant, very refined, and utterly delicious. Current vintage, I think, is 2012. Davies wine, there we are. £20. So not quite the great value I remember from the past, but still a wonderful wine. There you are. Plenty more, but that's probably enough to be going on with, I suspect. A big fan of what Navarra does. The whites to me aren't quite as interesting, and the reason is there. They grow Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay principally. There's a little bit of Verdejo, but they really focus on those. And they do good wines. They do decent Sauvignon and decent Chardonnay. Sometimes more than decent. But that's not what I want from Spain. There's plenty of other options out there. I was at a winery who specializes in Sauvignon Blanc for their whites there. And I said, isn't it a shame to grow French grapes here? Why don't you grow a Spanish grape like Albarino? And he looked at me like I was a lunatic. And he said, but they grow Albarino in Galicia. I said, yes. And they grow Sauvignon Blanc in the Loire. So why don't you try Albarino or something like that? He said, but they grow that in Galicia. And I just couldn't get through to him, Tim. That was, that was their thing, not his thing. But there we are. Very weird. They are weird sometimes. Now, you'll also see there's another colour on the map here. There's a lilac. And that is in Navarra, but DOCA Rioja. So producers in there actually have both DOs. They could, well, one DO and one DOCA. So they can make Rioja and they can make Navarra. And guess which one they choose to make? Well, we'll leave it there if we have no idea. There we are. There's you all got the handouts, by the way. All you both got the handouts. Good, excellent. So so those are the key points, really. Key style, rosé, Garnacha, Reds, pure Garnacha increasingly important, but the traditional red blends labelled as a Criantha, or Grand Reserva styles. And there's my list of producers. If you want to take a photograph of it, but it's on the handout. If you use a magnifying glass, you'll be able to read it. There's some great producers there. And there's one that's absolute bonkers. Bodegas Camilo Castilla. They make this muscat, which they age in demijohns outside in the snow and the sun. And it's like Australian liqueur muscat meets Pedro Jimenez. It's really fabulous. And there's a very famous producer called Bodegas Irache. And Irache are right on the principal Camino route through Navarra. And they very, very famously have two fountains. That one for water for pilgrims, and that one for wine for pilgrims. So you can have free water and free wine. They do sadly now have signs up saying that under 18s can't drink it, as if Spanish people under 18 don't drink wine. The dream, absolutely. I have never had it, so I don't know whether it's a good Irache wine or not, but they make great wine. So, drink as much Navarra as you can find would be my advice, because I think it's fab. So let's turn to, I suppose, the main event, Rioja. Rioja is the most famous Spanish wine region. Perhaps sherry can make a claim, but certainly in modern times, Rioja is. And that fame comes about really for one reason. By the way, I'm not going to be any use to you in the tasting. I apologise profusely. Someone's typing. Excellent. So here we have all the autonomous regions of Spain, plus the two autonomous cities there. There's La Rioja, quite small. It's the smallest mainland autonomous region. And the wine region doesn't quite fit. It's a little skew width. So it straddles, as I mentioned before, I think, the border with Navarra and the border with the País Vasco. It makes all styles, which sometimes astonishes people. I once genuinely overheard a barman telling a customer that Rioja was the Spanish for red. So a lot of people assume that Rioja only makes red wine. There is some evidence that in the past, in the Middle Ages, it was a white wine region, but then there's some evidence for that generally, I think. So it produces dry whites. It produces sweetish whites too. It produces sparkling. It produces rosé, rosado. But of course, it's most famous for its red wines. So, as I'm sure you all know, its signature grape is Tempranillo. We talked about that last week because of Castilla y León growing a lot of Tempranillo, although they usually call it something else. Tempranillo is considered quite tannic by Spanish drinkers. It's not really, but it may have been in the past when the wines weren't so well made. So it's normal to blend Tempranillo and Garnacha together, and that gives you a softer style of wine. That's the plan. Because Garnacha has almost no tannin and low acidity as well. particularly grown in Rioja. So that sort of softens Tempranillo, makes it less astringent. There's a few other grapes grown as well, which we'll mention as we go through, I expect. As far as white wines are concerned, the principal grape is Viura. And Viura is desperately dull on its own. It can make nice, fresh, simple wines when it's well done. But to get any flavour, any character, you've got to have lees, you've got to have oak. So there's three styles of white Rioja, really. Fresh, bright, crisp, fermented in stainless steel. Generally speaking, unless I'm there, I wouldn't bother, because there's more interesting wines like that, I think. You can disagree. The very traditional style that is to oak them to within an inch of their life. There aren't that many producers who do that anymore. There's really only two, and that's Marques de Morieta and López de Heredia Tondonia. And these are true niche wines, long aging, loads and loads of oak. So they're oily, they're savoury, they're honeyed, they're waxy. They're not everyone's idea of a fun glass of wine. They are an experience. So you've got to drink them when you're with like-minded wine wonks, really, and plan the food they go with as well. But they're great wines. Great wines. And then there's the middle route, and this is increasingly used, and this is barrel fermented wines which have no real oak aging after the fermentation. So you get this lovely creaminess creeping in. I'm a big fan of wines like that. And there's a few around. There's a brilliant one made by Muga. I love everything Muga does. Let's have a look. Yes, I found it. Amazing. One made by López de Heredia, which isn't quite as powerful as some, is this. So if you want to try the traditional style, that is a great bottle of wine. You've got to be in the mood, got to be feeling serious, but it is really good. That one, no, it's not that one. There we are. And I think one of the absolute masters of this style, Muga is too, but these guys, Ramirez de Ganuza. That's beautiful wine. As is Luis Cañas. Used to be able to find that quite widely, don't anymore. And I would also say they both do a barrel fermented Viura, and they're really nice wines, really nice, and great value for money. There is another route as well to make a more interesting style of white wine in Rioja. It's not done much, But boy, oh boy, are they good. And that's to use other grape varieties in the blend. And probably the best, which I love showing in tastings, is a single estate white Rioja. And it's called Contino Blanco. Contino is the estate, and it's owned by Cune. And it's just fantastic. It really is. I'll show you where it is. Here's my map of Rioja. And there's the modern capital of Rioja, Logroño. And sort of there, the border between Rioja Alta and Rioja Alavesa is on the river. And the Contino estate is surrounded on two sides by the river Ebro. And they make fantastic wines. And I think one of the most interesting is their Blanco, which is a new thing. Historically, people would co-ferment all the grapes. So they've got old vine Viura, and more importantly, old vine Garnacha Blanca. And Garnacha Blanca gives texture, and it's a brilliant, brilliant wine. It's not cheap, but it's worth it. Okay. So, I've mentioned Garnacha Blanca, and it's a great variety I love. And I probably shouldn't be showing you this, but I wanted to show you an interesting white wine from this part of Spain. And this one sort of cropped up in conversation, and I thought, ooh, I'm going to show them that. Because Garnacha Blanca is an increasingly important grape variety in Spain, because they realise it's something quite special. It's increasingly important in France too, by the way. So it is the green-skinned Grenache. So a bit like Pinot Blanc and Pinot Noir, they are identical, but this is green-skinned. There's also Grenache Gris with pink skins, by the way, which is also wonderful. And sometimes winemakers make a white wine out of Grenache Blanc and Grenache Gris. So these guys, Bodegas Ithadi, they're somewhere around, oops, not that it matters, but they're somewhere around there, I think. Yeah, absolutely there. Hang on. Gosh, I've only been there once. And this is a new wine for them. They do a typical modern white Rioja out of the Viura, but I thought I wouldn't show you that. Oh, great, thank you. I'm glad you like it. As I say, my tasting's not very good at the moment, so I'm really in your hands. But it's this is a small production of very old vines. They were planted in I've got the date somewhere in my notes here, 1960, so even older than me, and high up, 700 meters, 750 meters. So you're up into the foothills of the Sierra Cantabria, this south-facing apron. So it's a sun trap. And what I love about white Grenache, by the way, this has no oak at all. It's destemmed. It's fermented in stainless steel with the indigenous yeast. Okay, not a spontaneous fermentation though, just indigenous yeast, and they're trying to keep it as fresh as possible. So there's no malolactic here. So this is the natural acidity, because Grenache is a low acid grape. So you can either make it a very rich textured style, which some Spanish do, and the wines are amazing. And we'll talk about that next week. Hopefully, we're going to taste one. I can't remember what we've got next week. But no, I don't think we are, which is why we're having this. Um, or try and keep it as fresh and as bright as possible. And that's what these guys do. It's all bush vines, by the way, low density for the drought stress, and it's got, I think, lovely sort of. I was tasting it before but as I say, although my sense of smell has not gone, it's not great, or my taste buds. But it's got that lovely white stone fruit, hasn't it? Sort of peach, nectarine, apricot there. There's a sort of herbal note here as well, which is what I like very much about white Grenache. And it's on the palate. I love that sort of unctuousness, that succulence. I think that's why I like Garnacha Blanca or Grenache Blanc, because it's got this lovely textural component, even a very fresh style like this. So I think it's absolutely, absolutely delicious. And you've got that juicy fruit there as well. Enough acidity. And I think it's superb. Much more interesting than Viura. But there we are. Is that anyone's first Garnacha Blanca? Aha, well, you've got to try more if you liked it. The real place that specialises in it is Terra Alta in Catalonia, and they're brilliant wines. That's in Spain. Yeah, it's become one of my favourite. Wow, that's a coincidence. Was that Jorge something? Hordy Miro. I didn't know they still had that. How great. Yeah, that's a fresh style as well. He's a good winemaker. Very good winemaker. Terra Alta's great, but we'll talk about that next week because it's in Catalonia. There we are. So that's a brief look at white Rioja, which is more rewarding than the world believes, I think. I think so. Of course, Rioja is most famous for reds, and it is divided into 3 zones, 3 sub-regions, if you like. But again, these don't really appear on the label. And the great majority of wines are a blend, so the fruit can come from anywhere within the region. The top producers tend to stick to their area. It's relatively rare, but becoming less rare, for Rioja to be estate wines. It's not something they've traditionally done, and I'll tell you for why in a minute. So you've got the 2 famous ones. You've got Rioja Alta, where a lot of the really famous names are. Then you've got Rioja Alavesa, these 2 zones. These are both completely in the País Vasco. Okay, so they're the they're the principal red wine production of the Basque Country. It's a little drier than Rioja Alta, a little higher than Rioja Alta, but it doesn't make much odds. Rioja Alavesa is normally regarded as a place where you have small estates rather than big producers, whereas Rioja Alta is the sort of heartland of Rioja, and it's where the traditions sort of came about by having brands and buying fruit from growers and blending it together. And by the way, look, there's that little tiny bit I mentioned last week of Castillon, El Ternero, which makes Rioja. Tiny little exclave. There's another exclave there that doesn't. So weird. But there we are. I don't understand. I love an exclave and an enclave, but I don't understand why they are there. Rioja Oriental is the new name for Rioja Baja, and it's much, much hotter here, lower lying land, and it falls away towards Aragon, and it's seriously hot. And historically, that's where you grow garnacha. But, you know, that's as accurate as what they say about Champagne. You know, in truth, all the grapes are grown everywhere. There's more garnacha grown here than other grapes. But you'll still get garnacha up here as well. By the way, there is one Vino de la Tierra, the Valles del Sardasia, and it covers about half of Rioja, and it is only for white wine. And there are some really interesting white wines produced with this appellation, made from things like Riesling. So very interesting indeed. Okay. Now, Rioja is very beautiful. It's full of wonderful little villages that have nothing in them, by the way. If you're a tourist, there's nothing there apart from wineries. And these amazing mountains to the north. So the land is always sort of gently falling away down to the Ebro River. So, you know, this is where you think of for Rioja. So the land falls away to the Ebro, and then it's sort of flatter, not flat. And it's really lovely. So Rioja owes its fame to its location. The world sort of regards Rioja as a really traditional Spanish wine producing region. And it's a good story. It sells the wine, but it is absolutely not true. Until the middle of the 19th century, most Spanish wine was pretty basic stuff. I would go further, probably until the middle of the 20th century, most Spanish wine was pretty basic stuff. There was only one international wine in Spain, and that was sherry. And that was famous all around the world. But the principal reason why that was famous is it's produced there. And they've got ports. And what's more, ports where, why am I going there? It's there. Sorry, I'm having a ridiculous moment. It's here. So it's really, really easy to get to by sea. No other Spanish wine region historically had a port. So sherry was the one that was exported and known about as a consequence. So you couldn't really do anything in Rioja until the advent of the railways. There was a brief glimmer of international trade in the 1780s. There was a guy whose name entirely escapes me. I wonder if I've got it in my notes. I don't. No, I don't. Never mind. But an interesting man. He went to Bayonne in France, which is sort of there, to study for the church. And he fell in love with the wines of Bordeaux. He was from a little village in Rioja, and he went back. I must get his name. I'll wake it out of my notes. Hang on. I wrote a long piece about him on my blog, so it's terrible that I don't remember his name. Still, at least I remember what he did. There we are. He was from La Bastida, which is in Rioja Alavesa, and his family grew grapes and made wine. And so rather than stay with the church, he came back home and he started making wine using a very rough approximation of what they did in Bordeaux, using barrels. Now, they were almost impossible to buy, so they were all different sizes and types. And he wanted to export his wine as well and get a good price for it. He managed to export one shipload to Mexico in, I think, 1789, something like that. And his wines met with quite a bit of approval because putting them in oak gave richer mouthfeel, richer texture, and that must have been quite shocking in those days. You know, you were lucky in those days to have wines that were 10% alcohol, so you would have got more concentration because of evaporation, and that texture as well. So his wines must have made some sort of statement, because all his neighbours leapt into action, complained to the government, and got a law passed, that you could only charge one price for wine. And so there was absolutely no commercial rationale for aging it in oak, because you couldn't charge any more for it. So basically he gave up, went back to the church. But he is honoured. The local cooperative makes a wine in his name, and his family's vineyard is now, by a remarkable coincidence, part of Remunere's estate, which is the family business that gave the world Spain's probably most famous winemaker today, or one of them anyway, Telma Rodriguez. So the same piece of land. Anyway, there we are. You get the picture. Anyway, then nothing happened from a quality point of view until 1844. And there were two gentlemen. Obviously, there was a lot of trouble. There were wars, and, you know, there were several wars. There was the Peninsular War. There were a couple of civil wars in Spain as well, the Carlist Wars, that sort of followed on from the Peninsular War and covered the same sort of themes, whether Spain was going to follow the route of autocratic monarchy or the Enlightenment as introduced by the French Revolution and Napoleon and all of that. So there were about 3 civil wars fought over that throughout the 19th century. But you got a guy who became the Marqués de Murrieta. He was called Luciano de Murrieta, and he was on the losing side in the First Carlist War, and he exiled himself to London, and he fell in love with the wines of Bordeaux. He clearly wasn't poor. And he came back home in 1850, and he spent time in Bordeaux on the way home to to study winemaking, and he brought the winemaking techniques that he had discovered there to Rioja, where he, a friend of his, a colleague, an aristocrat, obviously, had a winery, and vineyards, more importantly. And he set up in there and went looking for barrels, which was this key ingredient in red Bordeaux winemaking. And they were all the wrong size and all of that, exactly like old Manuel had 60 years, 70 years before. But he managed to produce a harvest, and the wines were instantly successful because the oak instantly gave more richness, more depth, probably more sweetness as well. So it sort of covered up all the problems of 19th century winemaking of lack of concentration and all of that malarkey. So he was exporting to Cuba and Mexico, and he created the Marqués de Murrieta brand in 1852, and he moved to a new winery in the 1860s, which he called Higuey, because that's the name of the village, Castillo del Higuey. And Marqués de Murrieta became one of the founding fathers of Rioja. And the Marqués de Riscal was a very similar character. He also set out to build in the middle of the 1850s, basically a copy of chateaux in Bordeaux. It was completed in 1862, and he just won loads of gold medals for his wines at all sorts of wine events from then on. And of course, Riscal is one of the great Rioja producers as well. I have a label from that era. There you are. Where's that? There it is. So that is a very early Marqués de Riscal label. And you'll see that it doesn't mention Rioja at all. It calls itself Medoc Alavés. So that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to make Bordeaux, because that was where the money was. And Bordeaux didn't have any wine to sell. And so Bordeaux wine producers came to Rioja and chose the very best that they could find to take back to Bordeaux to sell as claret, because they didn't have any. Before Riscal and Murrieta did their stuff, this was what you would ferment wine in Rioja more often than not. And that, as you can probably see, is an entire cow skin. And there's a very, very early picture of the Riscal winery. That's in the 1860s. So they're very proud of their barrels. And so Riscal and Murrieta became brands very quickly. But all the other producers, they were just selling their wine to the French. And the French would come south on a buying trip, and they would select the barrels that they would want, and they would put reserve on them for the French. And then those barrels would be shipped north up to Bordeaux. And so the Spanish got used to the best wine being in barrels and being called reserve. And eventually they started putting the word reserva on their own bottles. But that wasn't until the 1920s. And it wasn't until the 1940s that it became a particular thing. Now, the food of Rioja, I think, is very important to understand when you taste the wine. It's very rich and meaty. So this is chuletas de cordero a la parrilla. So, barbecued grilled lamb cutlets. Brilliant. Lots of garlic, lots of herbs. Suckling pig that we saw last week as well. And one of my favourite peasant stews, patatas a la riojana con carne. So it's stewed potatoes and chorizo and bits of beef. And it's so good. And it's also a region that has some good cheese. There we are, goat's cheese. That's got its own dio, Los Cameros. Strangely enough, bacalao is popular in Rioja, but I expect historically it was dried. That's cod, of course, but I expect historically it was dried. And they eat by the seasons. So Menestra de Primavera is a vegetable stew, and you'll get this in Rioja and in neighbouring Navarra, and it's very good. Let's see, what have we got? Oh, let's taste our wine, shall we? Now, again, you'll have to do the work yourselves, I'm afraid. But this is one of I've got lots of favourite Rioja producers, but Lan are quite special, I think. They're in Rioja Alta, they're not far from Aro. They're quite something. All the really famous producers are around Aro. Fuenmayor, not far away at all. And they're quite classic. They were only founded in 1972, but they've got this sort of air of tradition about them, which I like very, very much, I must say. As long as the wines are good, I like tradition. If the wines aren't good, not so keen on it. This is not taken at Lan, but it gives you an idea of the extremes. So most of the time you'll find the posher end of the reds, this is at Muga, are fermented in wooden vats like that. But also some are fermented in stainless steel like that. And then normally, of course, you get aging in barrel. This is at Cune. I went to Lan before digital photographs, so they're no good, I'm afraid. The wine we've got in front of us is their Crianza, and I always think it's a brilliant, brilliant wine. Well, I've obviously done something very, very stupid indeed, but that's okay. That's entirely normal. I showed you last week the regulations for reservas and grand reservas and Crianza. So for some reason that's not on my presentation, which is a terrible oversight, for which I humbly apologise. But suffice to say, you've got unaged wines, which are called Joven. It's all in your handouts from last week, remember? Joven. There's no oak aging requirements for that at all. Sometimes they'll put a tiny bit of oak on it, but not enough to be the next level up, which is called a Crianza, which is 12 months in oak, if it's from Rioja or Ribera del Duero. Everywhere else in Spain, it's 6 months. Okay, and Crianza means to raise. It's the same as plants or children. And Crianza has always been made every year. Okay, And when I joined the wine trade, we were told that in very good years, they made reservas. And a reserva is supposed to be a different wine from a Crianza. And reservas spend 12 months in barrel as a minimum. These are minimum numbers, remember, plus another 2 years in bottle. And indeed, when I was young, you could see them on the label. They wouldn't put a vintage; they'd put third year on the label instead. And nowadays they make reservas every year because climate change, extra skill, know-how, technology, all of that. And then, of course, the absolute pinnacle is the Grand Reserva. And this is 24 months in barrel, at least. Plus 3 years. So it's released after 5 years, okay, a Grand Reserva. And they can be amazing, really amazing. I had a real incredible tasting. I tasted another wine from Quentin, Imperial Grand Reserva 2008 the other week, and it absolutely blew me away. It's about 60 quid a bottle, mine, but it really blew me away. I don't know whether it's worth it, but it just depends on how you feel, doesn't it, really? So let's taste our wine. So this is Bodegas Lan, and this is their Crianza. And it's a typical Rioja blend. It's almost all Tempranillo. It's 94% Tempranillo. Then it's got a little bit of Mazuelo, which is Carignan, and 2% Garnacha. Okay. And then it spends 12 months in barrels. Okay. So it's fermented in stainless steel with lots of pump overs to get good extraction. And then it's put in these barrels. If you look on the back label, you'll see the picture of the barrels. And they're hybrid oak, the French and American oak barrels. And it gives the best of both worlds. You get the sweetness from the American oak, and you get a dry spiciness from the French oak. In Rioja, it's traditional to use American oak. When the use of oak first began, Spain's trading partners were in the Americas, their recent colonies. We're talking the 1860s, 1870s. So that's where their trading partners were. And almost nobody used French oak, even the French in those days. They used Russian oak. And that was a bit difficult to get. And it was the Russian Revolution and the First World War that stopped people using Russian oak. No one ever believes me, by the way, when I say this, but it's true. So the Spanish used American oak. And American oak is sawn, not split, to make into planks. And that opens the grain up. And also they tend to dry it in kilns, which promotes the lactones, which give the creamy vanilla flavors. Doesn't promote, creates. So you get that vanilla, coconut, sweet character of American oak, and some of that drier, spicier character of French oak. And more French oak is being used in Rioja. And I think, personally, it's all to the good. It makes for more Elegant wines. Okay, so and it's 14 months in barrel, by the way. This wine, I know they put 12 on the bottle, but it's 14, and then another year, not quite a year, about 9 months in bottle for it to settle down. Okay. Good colour, good cherry red colour, I think. And I always think Rioja is quite unusual in that it has um, both red and black fruit notes in it very often. And this has, I think it's got strawberries, raspberries, cherries, cranberries, but also some plum there too. You enjoying it? Lovely vanilla notes, lovely sort of hint of mocha lurking in there too. Beginning of some leather. Um, so although it's youthful, it's showing a little development. It's really good. And then you give it a taste. Yeah, very well. And I think what I like about Lan is they're quite full. So you get a lovely mouthfeel. But it's got some nice bright acidity. Um, the tannins are there, but it's silky. Yeah, absolutely it does. Um, and although it's only a Criantha, I think it's phenomenally good and will age. There's some great value at Criantha levels, and that's one of my favourites. Another one that I would highly recommend is another Cune wine, and it's called Viña Real. It's a single estate Rioja, and the Criantha is ridiculously good. I mean, their Reserva and Grand Reserva are amazing too, but the Criantha is. Oh, let's have a look. Oh, there we are. It's in Waitrose. $9.99, and it is phenomenal wine. It really is, and it keeps well. You know, I would highly recommend that too. And like the Lan, it has beautiful fruit too. I took that photograph. I'm very proud of that photograph. It's looking south over Rioja Alavesa towards the Ebro beyond. So the vineyard this wine came from will be somewhere in that photograph, towards the left-hand side, towards the east. It's rather good. One of my favourites. So, well, I'm glad you like the wine. It's always good. So, just to recap the wines, there you are. As I was saying, traditionally brands, because the French came in, they had the know-how. So people set up big wineries and they brought fruit in from lots of different growers who had no idea how to make wine. And so they became branded wines, a bit like champagne in a way. So estates are relatively new and relatively rare. The first single wine estate in Rioja is supposed to have been Contino in 1974, but Remulere was the same year as well. But there's more and more people are doing their own estates. So usually you've got Tempranillo and Garnacha blends, and the thing about Rioja is they're generally quite medium-bodied with medium tannins and medium acidity. So they can be really appreciated by almost everyone. They're not too big for people there, but they give you plenty to chew on, as it was. Those are the three levels that I was talking about earlier. And here's a few producers for you. Riscal, Morieta, La Rioja Alta, great house too. Atadi, there's Contino, there's Finca Allende, Muga, I do like Muga. Muga's Reserva Especial. Oh my, that's a wine. That's all aged in French oak. It's really good. There's the old Ramirez de Ganuza, Lan, Imperial, which is part of Cune, great wines, and Viña Real, also part of Cune. Especially great value, Bodegas Urbina, amazing wines. Keep an eye out on those. Cune are good at everything they do. Baronia. Altos Ibericos, which is Torres. Torres are Catalan, really, but they make very good wines here. Baron de Ley and Faustino Primero, which is pretty famous, is a great value Grand Reserva. You can get 2001. Well, I don't go to Wetherspoons anymore, but just before lockdown, they were selling 2001 Faustino Primero for $19.99, which is quite remarkable. And it's a lovely place to visit, Rioja. No. Why is it there? Do they charge a fortune for it? Yeah. No. Oh, I see. Is it in the Wetherspoons in the airport? Okay, yeah, good. Oh, well, that's nice. Duty free? Oh, okay. So you're going to take it back to Spain? So don't stay in the little villages because they're quite dull. They're pretty to look at in the day, but nothing really happens there at night. I was on a trip once to Rioja Alavesa, and now I've got to get this right, otherwise the whole story falls apart. Okay, good. I don't know if I can remember the name of the town. Oh dear. Perhaps it was as simple as that. So we were staying in La Guardia in Rioja Alavesa. La Guardia. This was the frontier between Christians and the Moors for a long time. So you've got La Guardia and other fortified settlements. And our Spanish hosts had recommended to our English hosts to go to a particular maison or restaurant in a town here. And they'd booked the table. And then our English hosts took us to the restaurant in the town we were staying in. And we arrived at this restaurant, which looked a bit odd, but they had a table set for the right number of people and some bottles of wine out. And we had this sort of iffy meal. And the next morning on the coach, our English host got a phone call from a Maison in La Bastida that had exactly the same name as the one in La Guardia. And they're saying, where the hell were you last night? So there you are. Not much going on around there. It was a strange evening it was. But there are nice places to see. And so once you've toured wineries at night, during the day, and particularly gone to Aro, which is the old sort of centre of wine production, Lopez de Heredia are there, Cuney are there, Muga are there, lots of other producers. Go and stay in Logroño, and there's a whole area called Calle Laurel, as in and Hardy, and it's little streets with pincho bars. So these are actual pincho bars in Logroño. And there are two of them, by the way, across the road from each other. And that pincho is all they do. 3 mushrooms on a toothpick with a prawn. That's it. That's their entire menu. I prefer ones like that where you get a lot of choice. What would you drink with pinchos? I do like that. The little I can make out of it. Mushroom with prawn, I know. It's nice, but surely you need more than that. Man cannot live on prawn and mushroom alone. I better not drink anymore. So, there you are. I'm very sorry, we've whizzed through it. That's what comes of only having 2 people. So, next week we go to Catalonia. The best 2 people, absolutely. How could it be otherwise? So try lots and lots of Navarra, a bit of Aragon, and some more Rioja. No, absolutely, me neither. Oh, okay, we'll do. Sorry, Magda. Will it just be 2 of us? Oh no, we got more. Sorry. What? Oh, what I've I'm lost now. Thinking of me, maybe. Well, I hope you're doing something nice. I hope you're having a drink. Oh, love to go there. Probably not at this time of year, but I'd love to go there. Sorry, that was cruel. Why are you going there? Oh my God! Direct or from Lisbon? Direct. Wow! Wow! Well, I want a full report. There's supposed to be good wine. No, there is good wine. I've had a couple. Well, I hope you enjoy it. I'll be thinking of you jealously. Report back. You'll be able to watch the recording anyway. Okay. Well, I will see some of you next week then. Pleasure. Buenas noches. Oh, Magda, Oh, I'll sort it out next week. I'll get the handouts for next week to you as well. Okay. Ciao.